j'espère que la connexion avec New York... Ah.
So, hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so my French is really bad. I apologize. I'll have to do this in English, just a little bit better. I first want to thank the organizers for inviting us to present our study on the transcriptomic and metabolomic effects of AMX0035 in this late-breaking news session. And so the way we structure this, I'm going to talk for the first part. I'm going to present some experimental data on human cells, and then Bernjan Sanson will present the clinical study on AMX0035. I'm going to start, all of you are familiar with this concept. Majority of ALS cases are sporadic in nature, which means that they don't have a clear genetic underpinning. On the left in this slide here, I show, actually this is from a review paper, that shows how many genes have been identified and are linked to the 10% of familial ALS forms. And interestingly, they are, affect category of genes extremely different from one another, highlighting the fact that so far we don't have a clear common pathogenic mechanisms that causes ALS. And this poses clearly a great challenge in terms of developing, targeted and effective therapies, especially for sporadic ALS. But the silver lining, I think, is that, using a plethora of cellular or animal models and that somehow recapitulate the genetic forms of ALS, we've learned a lot about potential pathogenic pathways that underlie this disease. And this cartoon summarizes some of the, main findings that have accumulated over the past few decades, where you can see, as I said before, there are, a variety of very different pathogenic mechanisms that has been called into play for this disease. As I said before, one of the challenges for sporadic ALS is to model the disease and use models to test the effects of potential therapeutics that are being developed. We and others over the years have attempted to use patient-derived cells, at least to somehow, compensate for this lack of models. And in the past decade or so, our lab has collected a very large repository of human fibroblasts from ALS subjects as well as healthy controls. And, obviously, fibroblasts are not directly affected. They don't degenerate in the course of the disease. But they also have some advantages. One is that, they can be obtained from patients and controls with minimally invasive biopsy, skin biopsy. And also, interestingly, over the years, people have described some type of dysregulations in ALS, both genetic and non-familial forms, that somehow recapitulate some of the things we know about ALS, such as, for example, transcriptional dysregulation, DNA damage, proteinopathies such as TDP43 mislocalization. And our group has focused a lot on metabolic alterations, and we found, some subgroups of patients that have altered mitochondrial bioenergetics. So with this system in hand, we started a collaboration with Amylyx to investigate the transcriptional and metabolic effects of their combination compound called AMX0035. I think, the commercial name would be different. And this is a combination of phenylbutyrate and tauroursodesoxycholic acid, abbreviated in TURSO, or other abbreviation that there are different ways that people call this molecule. So there is a lot of literature behind the effects of PB and TURSO given individually in both, in preclinical study, both cellular models and animal models, and sometimes in patients as well. And interestingly, some of the effects that have been described for these molecules are similar. Let's say that they're shared between the two, and others are unique of one or the other molecule. And this cartoon tries to summarize a little bit what's been shown so far. And because of this, it made a lot of sense, I think, to try and combine these molecules and test whether they can have synergistic effects. And so not very much was known until recently on the molecular effects of these molecules given individually, and especially the comparison with the drugs given in combination in patient-derived cells. And to address this, we use a relatively simple strategy. So we took some samples, some lines, fibroblast lines from our repository. We randomly selected 12 ALS lines and 12 age-matched healthy controls. And we treated them for 5 days in culture with either a vehicle alone, which is PBS in this case, or the drug, PB Terso, which from now on, I think it's some of the slides is called TATCA, same thing, or the combination of the two at the concentrations indicated here. We fluid change the cells every day, providing new drug. And the idea here was to use concentrations that, somehow recapitulated what was found in patients' plasma in earlier phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. The results of these studies, eventually at the end of the 5 days, we extracted metabolites and messenger RNA for metabolomics and transcriptomics studies. The results of these studies have been recently published in Annals of Clinical and Translational Neurology. So I will first focus on the global effect of PB Terso and the combination in fibroblasts, in human fibroblasts, regardless of the disease state. And this is a brief summary of the metabolomic study. And what I would like to highlight first is that when we did PLSDA analysis of these metabolites, we saw that, for example, there were large differences in the way the samples clustered. And you can see here, for example, that the samples treated with TATCA were really completely overlapping with the control, with the vehicle control. So no discriminatory ability, but PB was separating a little bit, and this was largely due to the fact that we identified some PB-derived molecules in the cells, as expected. But most impressively, I think that the combination of the two clearly separated from the other groups. And this was largely due to the fact that there were many more metabolites that were significantly changed by the combination, more than PB and TATCA given individually. And even more interestingly, I think, we found that, as you can see in this Venn diagram on the right, that, actually, I'm going to use the laser pointers. Okay, so here on the right, you can see a Venn diagram that shows that the majority of these metabolites changed by combo did not overlap with the few metabolites changed by PB and TATCA, suggesting that combo has distinct and not just additive effects. And when we performed metabolite set enrichment analysis on these metabolites, focusing on combo, we found several pathways. Among the upregulated pathway, the most evident was affecting beta oxidation and fatty acid utilization. On the downregulated side, there were many different potential pathways. I would say that the majority of them involved amino acid metabolism. We then looked at transcriptomics, so gene expression analysis. And again, as you can see from here on the left, from PLSDA, combo was really the only group that could be separated from the other treatments. And again, this was due to the fact that the transcriptional effects of combo, meaning the combination of PB and Terso, change many more genes, both down and up, so down-regulated and up-regulated genes, compared to the individual treatments shown in these volcano plots here. Similar to, but at a larger scale than the metabolites, we also find that combo induced changes were quite unique. As you can see here, 1,796 genes that were found to be significantly changed by combo did not overlap with PB or TATCA administered individually. So that's very interesting for us. Again, it suggests that there is a synergistic effect that goes way beyond the effects of the additive effect of the two drugs. And so then we performed gene ontology analysis on this family of genes, and we found some pathways, where we found a lot of pathways, obviously. Some of them, among the top ones, were interesting to us because they could somehow be linked to the proposed pathogenic pathways that have been identified so far in ALS. Here are some pathways illustrated that went up, so upregulated pathways. Catabolic process involves mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation, for example. But we also found intracellular protein transport, which includes nucleocytoplasmic transport, which is now a pretty well established pathogenic pathway in ALS. Autophagy was up, cellular response to misfolded proteins, and also negative regulation of endoplasmic reticulum stress. On the downregulated side, we found stress, again, suggesting maybe cells treated with combo were less naturally stressed, less apoptosis, and less innate immunity activation. We then we used basically an algorithm that integrates metabolomics and transcriptomic data. And using this algorithm, we were able to identify a set of 20 most discriminant genes, shown here, and 5 most discriminant metabolites. So basically, just using these 20 genes or these 5 metabolites, we were able to clearly separate, as shown here by these rock curves, the combo-treated samples from all the other treatments. And when you put this together with the algorithm that I mentioned, there is a clear, you can see in this hierarchical clustering plot, there's a clear separation between combo-treated cells and vehicle-treated cells. This, it's interesting per se, but it also suggests that in the future, it may be possible to develop molecular or genetic biomarkers to follow, for example, treatment in patients that undergo AMX 0035 treatment. So to summarize this first part, we found that the combination of VB and torso changes the levels of many more metabolites and genes than either drug individually, and that the effects of the combination of metabolites and gene expression were largely distinct from those of either individual drug. So more changes and distinct changes. So we then focus on differences between sporadic ALS and control cells, this time just focusing on the combo treatment. And I must say ahead of time that we did not find, that's why I'm not showing, we didn't really not find much in terms of metabolites when we separated control and ALS. In other words, from the metabolites perspective, both control and ALS reacted similarly. But when it comes to gene expression, we found some very interesting differences. So first of all, again, ALS treated samples had many more, about double the number of genes affected than control cells. And when we look at the which differentially expressed genes were there, as you can see from this Venn diagram on the bottom left, they were distinct in combo and ALS from combo control treated. And there were many more, as expected, DEGs. And when we look at the gene ontology pathways that were created by this family of genes, we also saw many more pathways that could be identified in ALS cell treated with combo than in fact, zero pathways were identified in this case to be upregulated in combo. So this is quite interesting. And again, it suggests that the way that cells react to combo treatment really depends on whether they come from affected people or controls. So, we took a little dive into the gene ontology, trying to identify some of these pathways. And, this is just a summary that shows the top pathways, the most sort of significant pathways. For combo and controls, we saw very few, and they were all RNA splicing pathways. Whereas for combo ALS upregulation, we saw quite a lot of things, different things. Some of them I think are quite interesting, again, because it can be linked potentially to pathogenic pathways. One is, again, intracellular protein transport, including nucleocytoplasmic transport. Another one is microautophagy. These two were upregulated. And then among the things that were downregulated, we found, again, apoptosis, DNA damage stimulus, DNA repair, and ER overload response. So overall, this suggests that ALS cells maybe are doing better when treated with combo when it comes to this type of cell biology pathways. So lastly, we use weighted gene co-expression network analysis to try and correlate gene expression with clinical traits. So WCGN, what it does, essentially creates co-expression networks of genes that identify modules, the modules represented in these graphs by different colors, that have similar expression across samples. So it looks at how genes move together. They don't necessarily look at statistical significant p-values. They look at general direction of family of genes that are somehow similar to each other, also in terms of their function. I know I maybe oversimplified here, but that's kind of in a nutshell the concept. And then you use these modules to calculate correlation between them and specific clinical traits that are available. And so when we did that, oops, and my thing froze here. Okay, finally. So when we look at the correlations, these tables are a little complicated. So we boxed here one particular module of interest that emerged from the vehicle network. So these are cells treated with vehicle. And when this WCGNA is performed, we can find this module, in this module, interesting correlation with ALSFRS, the rate of decline of the ALSFRS, and the forced vital capacity. So we then looked into the combo network. So now it's modules that are generated from combo-treated cells. And we found that two modules very much overlap with the black module of the vehicle network in terms of which genes are there, contained in there. And here I show the overlap for the gene ontology pathways, which overlap by 65%. When you look at the individual gene, they actually overlap by 75%. What's most important is that when we took the overlapping gene and we ran the correlation analysis again, we saw that for the vehicle network, so these are cells treated with PBS, this correlation stood and they had pretty high p-values, pretty good p-values. But in the combo network, these correlations were completely abolished. And when we look at the pathways that these genes defined, again, we found that there was a change in, that they didn't change. The ones that were present in the vehicle and disappeared in the combo were cellular response to stress, nuclear export, regulation of innate immune response, and several other things. So what does this mean? It means essentially that when cells are treated with combo, these correlations are no longer there, possibly because the causes that created activation of those pathways had been removed. So to summarize this last part, we found that combo has unique effects in fibroblasts from ALS patients compared to healthy controls. And importantly, the effects of the combination encompasses changes in genes involved in several potential disease-relevant pathways. Now, of course, this is just an omics. We don't have a functional correlation to these fibroblasts. I should have said that at the onset. These ALS fibroblasts don't really show, viability phenotype in culture, so they're, they grow normally on the plate. These are like, really pathways that we think could be involved, but they're not necessarily killing cells in this setting. And these pathways involve, among others, mitochondrial function, unfolded protein response, as I mentioned earlier, nucleocytoplasmic transport, but also innate immune response, nucleic acid metabolism, and RNA processing. So to conclude, I want to acknowledge the people who did the work, some lab members, and especially Dr. Jasmine Feil. She just graduated in my lab. And Dr. Ibiki Kawamata was really the driver of this project. She designed all the experiments and supervised the project. And of course, the support of the National Institute of Health and AMITS. And so I think that it's best if we take questions at the end. I'll pass the ball to Dr. Sanson for the clinical part.
Thank you.
Stop sharing if I manage.
Thank you, Professor Manfredi. And,
I'll try. I have to stop sharing if I can. Okay, there we go. All right. Bernian, I think you can now share yours.
could I just check if I'm audible and my slides are visible on in the room?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you, Professor Manfredi, for that. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting us to talk about AMX0035 during this session. As introduced, I'll give a short presentation on the clinical data that we've seen with our phase 2 data study, Centaur, and a little bit on our ongoing phase 3 Phoenix study. Just want to point out, as a disclaimer, I do work for Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, and as you know, AMX0035 has not been approved in the European Union at this stage. So, first of all, I'd like to give you a bit of an idea of the Centaur study, about the trial design and what was done. So Centaur was a phase 2 trial, randomized, blinded, controlled study in which 137 patients were randomized between AMX0035 on top of standard of care treatment versus placebo on top of standard of care. So it was a 2-to-1 randomization, and I'd just like to point out that of the key inclusion criteria here, patients were enrolled on the basis of a definite ALS diagnosis with the ALS-Scoriol scoring system. Patients had to have had less than 18 months of symptom onset and also had to have an SVC of more than 60%. So standard of care when the trial was started was at that time only Riluzole. Edaravone was actually approved while the trial was being conducted, and for ethical reasons, of course, was then incorporated into the protocol as an allowed co-medication. The primary objective of the study was really to determine the safety and the tolerability of the combination, and also, of course, to look at the effectiveness in slowing the decline in function. And the primary endpoint for doing that was the ALSFRS-R score. The primary endpoint was of the randomized phase of the trial was 24 weeks, and all patients after those 24 weeks, if they had completed, were allowed entry into the open label extension phase. The majority of the patients actually also did enroll into that open label extension phase. Importantly, though, the patients and also the investigators remained blinded throughout the entire trial. So both the randomized phase and the open label extension was a blinded for the investigators and patients. So very briefly, you know, the key primary endpoint of the trial was this ALSFRS-R score over 24 weeks, which showed a statistically significant decrease in the rate of decline. The rate of decline was decreased by approximately 25% over the course of this 24-week time frame. Over the course of the 6 months, the difference there was up to 2.3 points over the course of that 6 months. Again, statistically significant difference. Importantly, though, as well, the overall survival analysis, which was done during the entire trial, so not only the randomized controlled phase, but also the extended open label extension, showed an increased median survival. The median survival in the open label extension phase of the trial, at the end of that trial, showed a difference of 4.8 months over that course. which again was statistically significant and very relevant, of course. So importantly to note is that when you're looking here is the curves is an AMX treatment group versus the placebo group as they were originally randomized to. Because after 6 months, actually all of the patients in the placebo group did transfer to active treatment. So even this could be a slight underestimation of the effect of our treatment on survival. And in the next slide, there was I'll show you the results of a post hoc analysis, which was actually done to accommodate for that treatment effect. So this is the so-called RPS-FTM analysis. So it's a rank-preserving model in which you eliminate the crossover effect of active treatment. So what you're looking at here is actually the same curves on the right-hand side. So the median survival in the active treatment group was 23.5 months. And as I just showed in the previous slide, it was 18.7 months in the placebo arm. But again, those patients were actually receiving active treatment after the 6-month randomized phase. Now, this model is a way of eliminating that crossover effect. And the model shows that actually the treatment effect is therefore even larger. So this is an increase of actually 9.7 months as compared to the placebo group. That's the key highlights of our efficacy. So showing that AMX0035 in this phase 2 trial was actually able to reduce the rate of decline of a functional endpoint, the ALSFRS-R, and importantly also able to increase the median overall survival. Just to touch also on safety, within the phase 2 trial, of course, safety events were reported across both groups. Nearly all patients did experience at least one treatment emergent adverse event. But overall, the similar rates were seen of adverse events between the two groups, with the exception of gastrointestinal events. So gastrointestinal events did occur with a greater frequency in the AMX0035 group. However, they were reported mainly in the first 3 weeks of treatment and were of transient nature over the overall and could be handled in the majority of patients and did not lead to a high degree of discontinuations. So that's the phase 2 trial, and obviously very encouraging results. But we obviously at Amylyx felt that we do need to confirm these data within a larger randomized controlled trial, a longer duration trial, and also a broader patient population. Because as I mentioned earlier when I was presenting the Phoenix trial design, the inclusion criteria of CEDTAR were pretty restricted to ensure that the trial was enriched also with patients with a quick trajectory of their disease progression, so that we could ascertain the effectiveness of treatment in a rather rapid fashion. Now, within the Phoenix trial, which is therefore the phase 3 pivotal confirmatory trial, we're expanding the group. So within this trial, which is currently ongoing in 11 countries in Europe, the patients who are eligible for the trial have a definite or clinically probable ALS. So we're allowing also a clinical probable ALS patients within the trial. We're expanding also the symptom onset from 18 months to 24 months. So symptoms can be existing for a longer duration, and also a less severe, or actually I should say, a more severe impact on the vital capacity. Again, here we're comparing AMX0035 as compared to the placebo group on top of standard of care in a 3-to-2 randomized fashion. And the primary endpoint within the trial here is a joint assessment of the ALSFRS-R over the 48 weeks, but here now also adjusted for mortality. And some key secondary endpoints are key clinical outcomes such as the SVC, quality of life, ventilation-free survival, and other outcomes, and especially important, also patient-reported outcomes. As with the phase 2 trial, we're allowing patients after the 48-week randomized controlled phase to roll over into the open label extension phase, where all patients will be provided with active treatment. Again, with the previous trial, all patients and also the investigators are remaining blinded throughout that phase of the trial as well, to ensure that the bias is removed. In the open label extension trial, we're obviously hoping for to show our benefit on overall survival, continuing also on the ALS-FRSR score, and some key events such as ventilatory support. So importantly, I'd just like to point out that France is really a key country for Amylyx in our clinical development path. So Phoenix is currently enrolling at 9 sites across France, and those are shown here. And we're really happy with the high level of engagement from the French community in this trial. And we're looking forward to still continuing enrollment for the upcoming months and continuing our engagement with the French community. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and interest, and open up for any questions that there may be.
Thank you very much, Bernjan and Professor Manfredi. Are there questions? Maybe I have a question for Bernjan, because in the Centaur trial, the slope of ALS-FRSR of patients was above 1 point per month. Did you look at the effect of the combination of drugs in a patient with intermediate slope of decline? That means if the effect is depending on the rate of deterioration or not.
So what I showed, of course, is the average of the slopes of the patients. So we don't have that level of analysis of individual subgroups. The group is already pretty limited in size. So that is not something that we performed within the Centaur trial.
Vous n'êtes pas obligé de poser des questions, les gens. Bon, Philippe.
I think the Phoenix trial, of course, will have a much broader patient population in terms of the inclusion criteria, and the slopes of decline that we're expecting there will be quite divergent. So I think the Phoenix trial will actually be a better opportunity to potentially see differences in the treatment effect within different severity categories or progression categories, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
A question to both of you. Do you think that the identification of the pathways in the first part will inform any intelligent choices of which populations eventually to treat in the end?
Is that for you or for me?
For both.
I think that's for you, Professor Manfredi.
Yeah, I think it might. I think it may help us start thinking in terms of biomarkers. A lot of the metabolites that we identified in the cells are things that are commonly found in patient plasma, for example. Now, we don't know anything about that yet, and hopefully in the future we or others will be able to analyze this data from the patient. I know that the plasma of the patients is routinely collected. So we can start thinking about that. And then ultimately, I always thought that, ALS is more of a syndrome than a specificity. So ultimately, there is more neurodegeneration, but there are probably many different pathways. And I wouldn't be surprised if some people will respond better to AMX0035 than others. And it would be really helpful to know how to identify these people. So yes, I think the answer to the question is yes.
Are there any questions? No, but so thank you very much, Professor Manfredi and Berjan, for your talk. I hope to see you in the next month.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Bye-bye.